Hey guys, I'm back after my $2,000 question video where I compared the new Sony A7 III to the Fujifilm X-H1 and the Panasonic G9. I'm here to tell you what I decided to go with. But first, some corrections on that video. I try to be as accurate as possible in my videos, especially videos like this where I'm just comparing specifications, so I want to clear a few things up. First of all, the battery life on the Sony A7 III, I put that it was 610 shots. It's 610 shots if you're using the EVF. If you're using the back LCD, it's 710. So in practice, it's probably going to be somewhere between 610 and 710. Regardless, it's a fantastic performance for a mirrorless camera. Pretty much the best out there right now. Also, now that some more press materials have come out for the Sony, I can confirm that the build quality is as stated. It has magnesium on the front and the top part of the bottom, but not the back. And lastly, the weight of the Panasonic G9 is actually 658 grams, quite a bit more than the 579 I had on the table. I think that was the weight without the battery. So with the battery, it's 658. Okay, so after all that, my choice is the Sony. I mean, I think it's going to be the choice of a lot of people based on the comments I've gotten. And I think this is really a milestone camera for them because it's coming in under $2,000. It's got great 4K video. It's got a new BSI sensor. And the autofocus, it rips the autofocus from the $4,500 A9, so you're getting that eye tracking, the eye focus, 10 frames per second, continuous autofocus, phase detect. I think it's going to be really a flexible camera for a lot of people. But for me, it's probably more about the image quality than the speed, and that's kind of where the Panasonic G9 left me cold, because I don't need 20 frames per second with autofocus, I don't need 60 without. It just seemed like a camera that was really focused on speed and kind of towards telephoto and birding based on the size of that grip and the way it's designed. So my style of shooting, I'm not saying I want something really slow with great image quality, something like a Pentax. I wanted the image quality, but I wanted a little bit of speed behind it without going nuts. So I think the Sony A7 III is going to strike that balance for me. In my RAW shooting, it's going to give me a lot more latitude in my RAW files than my G85. And really any of the Micro Four Thirds cameras, the tonality, the dynamic range especially, like the shadows are going to be a lot cleaner when I lift them up. For skin tones, it's going to have a little bit more true to life skin tones. And I want to clear something up for my last video. If you get the Sony, I'm not meaning to say that you're going to have like huge giant lenses. There are some more compact options out there. There's the 35mm f2.8, the 28mm f2, the 55 1.8. So there are some good high quality lenses. You won't have the super fast apertures necessarily, but if you factor in equivalence, you're coming in pretty much the same as you would, maybe even smaller than the other systems. So you have that choice with the Sony. You can get those big fast lenses, or you can get kind of smaller, more walk around type lenses. So that brings me into my next thing. So I don't have any Sony anything. I have some Pentax stuff I'm selling off, and I have a pretty complete Micro Four Thirds kit. So when I get my Sony, I'm going to get one lens to start out with, and that is going to be the Sony Zeiss Planar T-Star 50mm f1.4. Why this lens? Why this big, huge, honking lens? Well, I figured what better lens to show off my first full-frame camera, my first really strong push into image quality, than what is probably one of the most technically perfect 50mm lenses you can buy. It's almost up there with the Zeiss Otis lens, the super expensive manual focus only lens, but you get autofocus. The focusing is pretty quick. Despite having just fantastic sharpness at 1.4 across the frame, it still has beautiful bokeh, has great rendering of highlights and a smooth fall off. You get a great 3D pop. So even though it's a big, huge, heavy lens, and it's pretty expensive, it's about $1,400 or maybe $1,300, you're getting a lens that's just going to produce fantastic results. So I think this is the way I want to go. So yeah, I mean, I knew I had to have a fast 50 in my kit because the most used lens with my G85 is this Zhonghe Midicon 25mm f0.95. So I use this lens a lot. I use it for this shot behind me. I use it for the one in my last video on the wall. And almost all the time I'm shooting it at 0.95. So with the Sony, with the 51.4, I'd be getting an even faster and even shallower equivalent depth of field with the 1.4 on full frame. But I'd be getting a technically much better image, a much sharper at wide apertures, far fewer aberrations, no fringing. So it'd kind of be the best of both worlds, even though it would be a much bigger, heavier lens than this. It's going to have fantastic results. So I figured my money would be well spent on a high quality 50. So looking to the future, I'm not going to rush off and buy a whole Sony kit. These are expensive lenses. The ones I'm picking are going to be expensive lenses. And I think it's going to take a lot of thought for me to really commit to something. But right now, the Sony 12 to 24 millimeter f4 ultra wide zoom looks really attractive. I really like the Panasonic 7 to 14 I'm shooting this with. I use this lens quite a bit for landscape. So I knew with the Sony system I'd also want an ultra wide, and that 12 to 24 would get me even wider than this lens, because with this lens with the crop factor is actually a 14 to 28 versus a 12 to 24. So that's going to give me some really dramatic shots, I think, with the Sony, and it's super sharp edge to edge f4. The only thing I'd really be missing is a fast aperture for astrophotography, and that's where the Sigma lenses look really attractive to me. They have the 14 millimeter f1.8, the 20 and 24 millimeter f1.4 options. So yeah, I mean, the Sigma question, because on the telephoto end, the Sony 7-200 f4 looks like a good attractive option. However, I'm thinking, well, Sigma also makes a 105mm f1.4 and a 135mm f1.8. That would give me a much faster aperture. I'd lose the flexibility of a zoom, but if I wanted to mount the Sony on my my star tracker and put on a 135 1.8 or a 105 1.4, I could get some just breathtaking shots of the Orion Nebula, or just any kind of wide field astrophotography with either of those lenses. It would just suck in so much light. So I think on both ends it's going to take a little bit of thought for me. Right now I'm thinking it's probably more likely that I would get the Sony ultra wide zoom, because the flexibility on ultra wide, if I got the 14 1.8, I think the benefit of that would be mostly in astrophotography and very little in actually walking around and using it, because that perspective at 14 is just so wide that sometimes you want to come in a little bit, and that's where the 12 to 24 would be beneficial. However, on the telephoto end, it seems like I'm better at working with telephoto primes than zooms in terms of flexibility. I think either the 105 or the 135 with those fast apertures would be pretty easy for me to work with. So it's looking more likely they'll go with the Sigma for the telephoto end than the wide end. But that's a discussion for another day. Don't want to dwell too much on that. Going to be ordering the Sony A7 III with the 50mm f1.4 soon, and I'll check back in with you guys. All right, thanks for watching.